Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming and welcome. If you haven't already, please help yourself to some more goodies. In fact, they come with Mrs. Flora's seal of approval, and I've already overindulged, so I'm going to have to stop. This year, we have been working on a theme of ethics for the MPA leadership and RIASPA programming. And if you were able to make our October 17th program, we coordinated that with the ethics class last fall, and we have two excellent speakers. And at that event was tonight's featured speaker, Jason Grammit. Mr. Grammit's to my left. And we've tapped him to be the second addition to this theme that we're doing in ethics. And our final meeting will be May 1. That will be on the Bay Point facility in Portsmouth. It begins at approximately 9. Registration, breakfast, coffee, etc. starting at 8:30, right, Mrs. Flora? Yep. Until approximately 9:15, and then we have a keynote speaker who had a column in today's project. And her name is Froma Harp, and I believe that she lives here in Providence. She writes for the Projo, but she's syndicated throughout the nation. So I think she's going to be an excellent speaker. And we've given her sort of a wide open area of ethics to work on, but I'm sure given her columns that I now follow regularly, I'm sure she'll be able to handle that work. Also tonight we have some other special folks joining us from BivCAP. That would be the Blackstone Valley Community Action Agency. Christine Stone, and Ms. Paula Castro of our program is sort of a administrator over there, isn't she? Yeah, she's running things. She couldn't be with us tonight, but because of Ms. Paula Castro's connection to the program, we're putting public administration and one hopes ethics into action with a project with Youth Build and the Pawtucket schools. We have with us again tonight Mr. Connolly. Where did he go? Here he comes. Mr. Souza from Tolman High School and Mr. Costa from Shea High School, who are teachers in that program. And we've been building a lot of momentum in the PA Academy, and we hope to do that with the Youth Build group beginning this spring, and we plan on making this a larger effort for coming grant cycles. Also joining us tonight is Mr. Sylvia from the city of Pawtucket, who's in charge of public works there. He keeps the city humming, and we're hopeful of putting all of our energies together with the city of Pawtucket to actually build some things. So that's the kind of folks we attract to this program, so I'm very pleased about that. Now to our featured speaker. Jason Grammit is with the Rhode Island Ethics Commission. He's the Assistant Director and Education Coordinator for the Rhode Island Ethics Commission, and it's in that capacity, really, that I'm asking him to address us tonight. He has teaching experience in beyond working in the for the Ethics Commission. He has presented material for the University of Rhode Island MPA program, and he's teaching a course in business ethics at Johnson & Wales just down the way. So Mr. Grammit is well versed in this area, and it is with great pleasure that I invite him to take the podium and welcome him, please, if you would.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. Also, thank you, Jane, for helping to put this together. Thank all of you for coming out on a Wednesday night, right, when it's about to either snow or rain, depending upon who you believe. I think rain. I don't believe we're going to get more snow. So I'm on record, on video, saying that. So we'll see how that goes. So, you know, I'm here because I was asked to come out here and talk about ethics, which I'm glad to do. I mean, you know, as you heard from the introduction, I like ethics. You know, I work at the Rhode Island Ethics Commission. I teach business ethics. You know, in the Bar Association, I volunteer on the Ethics and Professionalism Committee. Ethics is something that is important in my life. Outside of work and inside work is something I like to think about, read articles about. But I wonder why you're here. You know, why do you love ethics as much as I do? Is it a subject that interests you as much as it interests me? I'm going to not ask you to answer. I'm just going to hope that the answer is yes. I'm going to fantasize that it means as much to all of you, and I think there's a chance that it might. Or even if you're here for some other reason tonight, I'm hopeful that this idea of ethics, whether we're talking about government ethics or just your own personal ethical decisions or business ethics, professional ethics, I hope it's something that you'll start to think a little bit more about. And that's kind of somewhat of the theme that I want to talk about a bit tonight. I am going to focus on government ethics and the work we do with the Rhode Island Ethics Commission that is governmentally related. But this whole concept of even thinking about ethics or thinking about regulating public officials' conduct, regulating their conflicts of interest, having gift rules, revolving door, these kinds of buzzwords that you hear, this is a relatively new concept in the United States. Sure, there have been things that look like ethics rules that go all the way back to ancient Rome, but the idea of actually creating an administrative agency that will enforce specific ethical conflict of interest rules really just started in the last century. What big event do you think kicked off the idea that maybe we should have a government agency that is a watchdog to make sure that our public officials are acting properly?
Watergate.
Watergate, right? That's, for those of you who, maybe you know what Watergate is, maybe some of the, I was young enough at the time, I thought Watergate was a TV show that my parents used to watch every night. Are you going to watch Watergate again?
Yeah.
Because that's what, the only thing that was on, news about Watergate. But, it was just this great example of government corruption at the highest, the highest levels, in the Oval Office, and slush funds, and burglaries, and all kinds of really horrible ideas. And this led not just the U.S. government, but all of the various states, or most of them, to decide that maybe we need to have some type of watchdog within the governmental unit that keeps track of us, that has the ability to have some kind of combination of either creating a code of conduct or a code of ethics and then also enforcing that code of conduct and that code of ethics. And Rhode Island was no exception. The first Conflict of Interest Commission was created in Rhode Island in 1976, and it was a purely legislative creation. And it worked pretty good, but it didn't work perfectly. But it did get almost perfected about a decade later through a really amazing circumstance, which was, I don't know if you know this, but every 10 years in Rhode Island, you get the chance to decide whether or not to hold a constitutional convention and amend the state's constitution. And it hasn't happened in a long time. The last time was 1986. And in 1986, the voters said, yeah, let's have a constitutional convention and talk about a few things. And one of the things they talked about was ethics in government. And what came out of this convention was this idea that, we kind of have the fox watching the hen house here. The assembly is great, I have no problems with our legislature, but the idea that the legislature itself gets to create, through statute, an ethics agency, and then the legislature gets to enact the laws that apply to ethics, what if they don't like them all of a sudden? What if they decide it's getting a little too close? What could they do? We just change the law. So what came out of this constitutional convention was this idea of, let's amend the Constitution. Let's write right in the Constitution that there will be this independent body, a nonpartisan, independent ethics commission, and we'll give it the authority to write the code of ethics, and we'll give it the authority to enforce the code of ethics. And so, this isn't a lecture on law, it's not a lecture on preemption rules and things, but we all know what's the highest law in the land? The Constitution. And the legislature can't enact any laws that go against the Constitution, or they would be unconstitutional, right? So by putting it in the I mean, it was a genius stroke, and you can actually look at the transcripts of the Ethics Committee to the Constitutional Convention and see exactly where they came up with this idea. It was a real eureka moment. And by the way, Rhode Island, you're not going to believe this, Rhode Island has the strongest ethics commission in the entire country. There is no other ethics commission, not just in the United States, by the way. Oh, shaking his head. That is so not true. Listen, we can argue about whether we use that power effectively, right? We can argue, you know, you can have an Uzi, but if you're not going to pick it up, then that's a different issue, right? So, not to talk about guns in a crowded room. Let's not start that conversation. So, the reason the Ethics Commission, the Rhode Island Ethics Commission, is the strongest ethics commission in the country is because it can do something that no other ethics commission in the country can do. It can do something that no other agency in the state of Rhode Island or in the country can do, and that is it can legislate substantive ethics laws. That is something that is reserved for the legislatures of every other state. Agencies pass regulations. For those of you who ever take an administrative law class, you know that agencies like the DEM can pass environmental regulations, but they always have to be consistent with the underlying enabling legislation that created DEM. And if they try to surpass that power, then those regulations will be deemed invalid. But the Ethics Commission, and the Supreme Court has said, so we know it's true, has the primary constitutional power to legislate substantive ethics. We get to set the rules, and then we get to enforce them. The legislature has a concurrent ability to do that. So they can also pass laws, but they can't be inconsistent with what the Ethics Commission does. And so I just want to, that is a remarkable, remarkable power that you'll never find anywhere else. And you will probably never find it in Rhode Island again. You know, who knows if they knew exactly what they were doing. So we've got this constitutional, independent, nonpartisan Ethics Commission. We have an amendment to the Constitution. And now here's where things got interesting. Because the Constitution was amended in two ways. One was the nuts and bolts amendment. That gave us our authority to enforce the law and pass the code of ethics, to pass rules that set the standards of conduct. I call this the low bar of ethical conduct. Okay, right? So if the Ethics Commission passes a law that says you can't accept a gift from someone who is expecting something in return, and you violate that, you know, that's the low bar of conduct, right? I mean, there's a lot of room for you to have acted more ethically. Just because you didn't violate the law doesn't mean that you have acted perfectly ethically. You know, by analogy, if you're walking past someone on the street, you could kill them. Or you could say, have a nice day. The fact that you decided not to assault them doesn't make you an ethical person, right? You just didn't break the law. There's a lot more you could have done in that interaction that would have been better. And so that's what I mean when I say it's the low bar. If you come close to violating the code, you're setting yourself up for the lowest standards of ethical conduct. But you, the citizens, also amended the Constitution to put in the high bar of ethical conduct. And that's where you put your inspirational language. This is really the most beautiful part of the entire state constitution, or one of the most beautiful parts. It's important enough at my job that I have this language printed on the back of my business cards. And I don't need to pull out my business card to recite it. This is where the citizens say that the people of the state of Rhode Island believe that public officials and public employees should hold themselves to the highest standards of ethical conduct, to be open, accountable, responsive, respect the public trust, avoid the appearance of impropriety, and not use their public office for personal gain or advantage. So think about that. You must hold yourself not to a standard of ethical conduct, but the highest standard of ethical conduct. That's what the public expects of people who are elected officials, appointed officials, public employees at the state and local level. To not only not to do something wrong, something improper, but to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. And that's really the high bar. So I just love that language. I mean, that's to me, that's exciting. But sometimes I ask myself, and maybe it would be fair for you to ask, okay, well, that's pretty clear, right? Highest standards of ethical conduct. Avoid the appearance of impropriety. Why do we need an ethics commission? I mean, there it is. It's not written in legalese, not really. So why can't you just got elected. Hey, hold yourself to the highest standards of ethical conduct. If something looks bad, don't do it. Why don't we just, why do we need then to enact laws that show people what the lowest standard of ethical conduct is, and to fine people or remove them from office, maybe even if they violate it? I mean, what's your theory? Why do we need ethics rules? I guess is what I'm asking.
Everybody has a different level of what they think is ethical, a different perception. So I think the Ethics Commission is there for a reminder and for enforcement. So there's a universal language of ethical conduct.
Okay, well, this is part of it, right? Ethical relativity, it's all depending upon where you come from. I'm not going to get into what town you come from, that it makes a difference, right? Although some people might argue that, but when in Rome, do as the Romans do. You've heard that saying. So that might be part of it, why we need rules, why we can't just say, well, everyone has a different idea. But I mean, it must be kind of close. But even to get a little more philosophical about it, what is the purpose of ethics rules? Right? We shouldn't have laws that don't have a good reason. Right? I mean, why? It seems like a simple question, but have you ever thought about it? What's important about our public officials acting ethically? What's the goal of keeping them from acting unethically? What's the harm in a mayor accepting a free furnace in his house from someone who is a contractor with the town? Why is it so important that we have to enact laws and create $1 million agency that enforces these laws?
That's not a democratic way. That's not fair. That's not a level playing field. You have to have ethics to have people abide by it.
But why? Why is that important? That's my...
Well, when someone is elected, there's a sense of public trust in that individual to look out for the best interest of everyone. And it's a problem when that individual who has been given the public trust violates it by doing things like that. People find that disturbing, for you to stand in any forum and tell me how to live, and yet I've given you my trust and my tax dollars, and you've done something completely contrary to what you are enforcing, the standard you're holding me to. People have a problem with that. And I think that's what we see, in the recent headlines in places like Central Falls, or 10 years ago in Providence. And that person, the reason why I was shaking my head, is now the watchdog for ethics in Rhode Island on talk radio, giving people a hard time, not acting ethically.
And people call that program and still call him mayor.
And they do.
Didn't he forfeit that title?
He did.
And yet our highest government officials, our icons of civic service, still give him that honorific. I find that honorific to be horrific.
It is horrific, and it was even more horrific is after he stepped down from office, between that time and when he actually went to jail, it was an election year, 2002, and local TV stations were hiring him as a consultant to talk about his forecast for the election.
Right. He was the political consultant.
He was a convicted criminal awaiting jail time.
For corruption.
For corruption.
In public office.
It was a criminal enterprise is what Judge Torres told him he was running.
But if you call a show, you'll call him Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor.
And okay, so now see, you've got me going.
But to answer your question, we have a sense of public trust in people that we elect. And so that's why I think, or at least I would assert, why we have an ethics commission.
I want to say, between these two comments, I should have known that I was coming out to speak to a smart, audience, because what I was expecting was for immediately someone to jump in and say, well, it's bad for business if bad ethics is bad for business, and it's corruption steals our tax dollars, and maybe true, but I was expecting someone to really look at the consequence of corruption and say, well, it's a bad consequence, it's a waste of tax dollars, it's a bad consequence, businesses won't come into the state, it's a bad consequence, and all of that might be true, but then I was going to sweep in and say what you guys have said, okay? Which is, this is the idea of government ethics. This is why government ethics is so different than business ethics. That the reason we have an ethics commission, the reason we care about our public officials doing the right thing, acting ethically, is not and shouldn't be because of a cost-benefit analysis. Most of us go through our lives acting a certain way after undertaking a cost-benefit analysis. We look at the results, and the results guide our decision-making as to whether or not it's ethical. Right? So whether you think you do or not. And not everyone does, but the classic example is, it's wintertime, it's March, we've all put on a little bit of weight, myself included, my wife included, and we're about to go out on Friday. She pulls into some jeans that she fit in the summer, but maybe doesn't fit in now, and asks me, have I gained weight? Do I look okay? And, okay, so what is the right answer here?
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, and by the way, this works both ways. Hubby puts on that T-shirt that is 2 sizes too small, and it's, the same thing. And so, I'm okay. So what the thinking is, of course, what's the benefit of telling the truth? What's the harm in telling the truth? A lot of harm in telling the truth. They hurt feelings, you're going to ruin the evening, she's going to be self-conscious. And the fact is you love her anyway. So why not make her feel good? Why not have a wonderful time? She'll feel confident and sexy, and we'll just have a wonderful night out, which we haven't had in a long time. You look great, honey, I love you. Why don't I just say that? Even though, okay. Well, the answer is because lying is unethical, right? I mean, these are the 2 ways of looking at it. Is it ethical for me to tell her the lie, even though there are only benefits to me telling the lie? Or the consequences are so minuscule compared to the wonderful benefits that will come with the lie. So in that circumstance, is telling a lie ethical? Anybody? Anybody think that's the ethical thing to do? In that circumstance, sometimes telling a white lie is the proper course of conduct.
Well, it's the issue of honesty versus brutal honesty. It's, are you hurting the other person by telling the brutal truth? That's the way I look at it.
Right.
Because you can rationalize it quite easily by saying, if I said, you look wonderful, honey, you won't be on your 6th wife like I am. No.
Right. Well, I think so. I think you're making a point, and I think it's the correct point, and that is to say that most of us, when we make our decisions, our ethical, moral decisions, we're certainly weighing the pros and cons. Right? Was it ethical for Jean Valjean to steal a loaf of bread to feed his sister's kids? For those of you who are Les Mis fans, for those of you who aren't, I'm sorry. Go see the show, go see the movie. So is stealing ethical under some circumstances? Is lying ethical under some circumstances? Is killing ethical under some self-defense? Something like that. Get in my time machine and go back and kill Hitler. Ethical? I mean, we could go on and on and on and on. But that's not government ethics, okay? And that's the point that I think these 2 gentlemen just made, which is, the reason it's important to act ethically in government isn't because of these great consequences, lower taxes, we don't waste money, it's because the public believes that public officials have a duty to act a certain way. There's a certain thing called public trust. And that part of the Constitution that I quoted from lays it right out in black and white. The people of the state of Rhode Island believe that public officials and employees should hold themselves to the highest standards of ethical conduct. Respect the public trust. Be open, accountable, responsive. Avoid the appearance of impropriety. Not use their public position for private gain or advantage. There it is.
Isn't it really that the document says we the people? And if we allow public officials to be unethical, we hurt ourselves. We destroy our democracy, we destroy our form of government by allowing that to occur. So we become lesser by allowing that behavior.
I think you're right. You know, the argument for not allowing lies and calling them unethical under every circumstance is based on logic. If you think about it, if you allow for a lie, if lying is okay under some circumstances, then there's no such thing as truth, right? If lying is okay, then truth is meaningless. So if unethical conduct is okay in some circumstances in government, then the whole idea of honest, ethical, accountable government goes out the window the same way. And at least that's the theory.
Yeah, another example to prove or illustrate your point is in the film. I wasn't alive for the actual interviews, but in the film Frost Nixon that came out 7 years ago, there's a scene midway or towards the end of the film, and Richard Nixon actually says, if it's illegal, if it's for the best interest of the country, it's okay for me to do it.
Right. I mean, listen.
And that's the philosophical.
We could have this. I mean, let's talk about drones. Let's talk. I mean, we can talk about all kinds of things like that.
And we know what we did with him. So. Well,
let's not talk about drones. You know. But that's a very good point. So you can have this kind of discussion on everything. You know, my own personal philosophy is, you know, is it always possible to just act as if you have a duty and act ethically? You know. Do I ever lie? You know, do I ever cheat? Do I ever steal? Do I ever kill? You know, animals. Okay, you know, an ant, something like that. You know, maybe, but you know, I think we can aspire to not. Right? We can understand that lying is wrong and aspire to never lie. We certainly can and should. You know, and we expect that of our government officials.
Well, additionally, though, government officials take an oath to tell the truth and serve the public. It's not just what we expect. They promise us that they will do that.
Well, they do, but if you allow for this kind of consequentialism, this kind of utilitarianism in government service, then you can explain anything away. You know, yes, I gave this contract to my brother-in-law's company, but he had the lowest bid, and he was the most experienced. So, is it okay for me to have given this contract to my brother-in-law's company under those circumstances?
It meets the standard.
No.
He met the standard. Is it okay?
Yes.
So, if I'm the company that didn't get the contract, and I find out that the public works officer who opened up the bids ended up awarding it to his brother-in-law's company, how do I feel about that?
I'm sure you feel a certain kind of way. But, I mean...
Would you say that it appears to be improper?
Appears.
Is there an appearance of impropriety?
Yes, there is. But if the contract was given based on, you won a contract on the merits of what you were looking for, I would say yes, but in the public's eye, it would always be no, he awarded that to his brother in a conflict of interest.
So what the Ethics Commission has done is try to take your sensibilities into account and also try to make a clear line. And so what we would have said is, okay, the brother-in-law can bid and even get accepted, but I need to step out of the process and let someone else make that call. If they're really the best for the job, then if I recuse and step aside and someone else comes up and makes that decision, it'll still be the right decision. So there are circumstances where you allow these things to happen, but you don't want there to be that appearance of impropriety. Because let's face it, you know, we're in Rhode Island, right? I mean, right? Those of you who giggled just now when I said we're in Rhode Island, why do you giggle about being in Rhode Island? Like, what does that mean?
What could be nepotism?
Does Rhode Island have a bad reputation for corruption and right? Why is that? What do we have a worse reputation than Nebraska? You know, yes, we do. Do we have a worse reputation than Michigan? Yes. Do we have a worse reputation than Louisiana? Maybe, maybe not. You know, New Jersey? Maybe, maybe not. But we all admit we've got a bad reputation. There's this, you know, idea about, there's this cynicism about our public officials. There's a reason why 6:30 a.m. devotes their entire day of programming to being critical of state employees and government workers and every single thing that any elected official does. I mean, it's a cynicism, and we're cynical people here in Rhode Island. So this idea of avoiding even the appearance of impropriety takes on a greater importance, I would argue, in Rhode Island. The idea that we need to kind of go above and beyond. We've all heard that about people who are disadvantaged or minorities saying, I had to work twice as hard to get the same things that others got. And I think for Rhode Island, when you're talking about ethics, I think that may apply. Rhode Island needs to work twice as hard as Michigan in order to claw back its reputation as a place where there's fair dealing, where you don't have to be paid off to get contracts and that type of thing. So,
on that note, I have a question.
Sure.
Comparing Rhode Island to other states, what makes the Ethics Commission in Rhode Island stronger than any of the other states?
Well, what makes it stronger is it's got the stronger infrastructure. We can debate whether we've got the stronger will to enforce what we have. And that's where I said, when I started out, you could have, an Uzi, but if you're not willing to pick it up, then you may as well have a pocket knife. So, in terms of the power is here. The Ethics Commission has authority. It has the ability to enforce a very strict code of ethics. I think it does a pretty good job of it. But that also gets into this idea of what should the Ethics Commission be doing? What is the best use of the resources that the state has devoted to this Ethics Commission? It's one thing to say, okay, the Constitution requires there be an Ethics Commission. It's quite another thing to say, well, how much money will we give it each year? How many employees can they have? What kind of resources will we give them to go about their job and get this done? And so you have to be as efficient as possible to try to achieve the best result. But here's what I believe, and I think it's what the commission believes, is that time is on our side. There's a quote from Thomas Paine that says, and this one I am just paraphrasing, something along the lines of, a long history of doing a thing a certain way gives it the superficial appearance of being done the right way. And when you try to change that, there will be a lot of pushback. But through time, it'll just happen. So what he believed was, you keep pointing it out, and at first people will push away from it and say no, 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 and then eventually it'll kind of seep into the consciousness. But time is on our side in terms of if we keep saying it. So what does the Ethics Commission do in order to try and combat this bad reputation, or maybe even the reality of unethical conduct? Because we see it, right? And we see our people going to jail. We see Mayor Moreau just reported to prison yesterday. Right? We see John Salona going to prison. We see, I think there have been 3 reps in the last year that have either gone to or come out of prison. We see all of these examples of corruption. So there is a reality to it. I think we're tackling it in a twofold way. On one level, we are enforcing the code of ethics where we can, and working with other law enforcement agencies so that when it's a big case, justice will be served, whether it comes from the Ethics Commission or whether it comes from U.S. District Court for the District of Rhode Island or from the Superior Court, right? So the Moreau case was a good example of that, where there was a simultaneous ethics prosecution, but there was also a federal prosecution that the U.S. attorney, and he ended up going to prison. Ethics Commission doesn't send people to prison, we just fine them money. So we do enforcement actions. We were key in the Salona enforcement action. The evidence that the Ethics Commission found and uncovered and shared with the FBI and others is what led Senator Salona to go to prison in his prosecution. But maybe more important than that, I think, is this idea of doing what I'm doing here tonight. You know, the Commission has an education program. I go out and I speak to groups all the time. We talk about ethics. We want to get people thinking about ethics. We want people to know that the public expects the highest standards of ethical conduct, and that the highest standards, you know, this is the law, this is the rule book, this is the code of ethics. You know, I want public officials to say their oath, know there's a code of ethics, and know that they don't need it because they're going to hold themselves to the highest standards of ethics. I often tell people it's a fallacy that there's this line that separates ethical conduct from unethical conduct, right? Legal conduct from illegal conduct. That's what you think about when you see that there's a law book. There must be a line. And I can walk right up to that line, and as long as I don't step too far over it, then what I'm doing is legal. And if it's legal, it's ethical. And that's such a dangerous way to operate, right? That's the business playbook, maybe, right? If your goal is just to make a profit by following the rules, you follow the rules. And as long as you don't break the law and you follow the rules, if you have to lay people off, you lay people off. That's towing up to the line, right? You have to. But it's not a line. It's a zone. So think of a football field, right? And the 50-yard line is this imaginary line that separates ethical from unethical conduct. And what I'm saying is, maybe there's a line, maybe there's not. But it's a gray line, and it's sitting in a gray zone that sits between both 40-yard lines, right? So in the middle of the field is just this gray zone. And the line is in there somewhere, but you'll never find it. You can't see it. So how can you avoid crossing the line? Just stay out of the zone. Don't even go in the zone. That's the appearance of impropriety zone. That's that warning bell that tells you something is not quite right. That's that thing that makes you think, maybe I won't tell my family about this over dinner. You know, gee, that's the one that says, gosh, I hope the press doesn't ask about this. Right? Whether it's legal or not, whether it's ethical, whether it violates the code of ethics is irrelevant. If you have to think like that, then you know that it's not the highest standards of ethical conduct. You know that there's an appearance of impropriety. You know that you're in that gray zone that I'm trying to talk about.
You know, I think Dr. Hall, I want to thank him for talking about the Public Administration Academy. It's kind of interesting in Pawtucket. How do we get to a situation where you've got Cape Verdean, Hispanic students, low-income, not well-educated parents, and very poor families in Pawtucket? How do we end up with the only government and public administration academy in the United States? Others, you know, they'll do engineering and math, whatever. How do we end up with public administration? Well, it alludes to exactly what you're talking about, and here's the case. I'm with my group of students, my initial group, and we're talking about ethics in government, and just like they're explaining now. So the students, a couple of young ladies said, oh, we got a real problem that we got to handle ethically here that's happening to us. All right, spell it. Well, Rhode Island's an at-will hiring state. You can be fired at will. Okay. The burger donut shop world that's out there in Rhode Island where these kids work, they have a loophole in the law where they can work 90 days as a trainee. And they make about $2.50 less than the minimum. So let's say these kids are making $4 an hour at a time. I don't remember exactly what it was. But the students say, this is what happens. We work for 87 days for Burger Place M, and we get fired. And they bring in another cast of characters to work for another 85 days, or 86 days, then they're fired. So the labor cost, obviously, is always $4 an hour, or whatever it was. And then they go to Burger Place W, and the same thing happens there, and they go to Donut Shop D, right. And the same thing happens. They said, what happens to us now, we go for a regular job. We're getting out of high school, we're trying to work for employer X. They look at the employment record, you can't hold a job. 90 days, you're done. What's up with this? They said it's wrong and it's unethical that they have the ability to do that. Okay, let's follow this thing through. So I let them direct it. I'm their teacher, I'm their guide. I'm not going to tell them what the answer is. Let's find it. They go to the Attorney General. Yes, it's legal. This is the law in Rhode Island. If you want to change it, you've got to go to the legislature. They don't want to hear it. High school kids from Pawtucket, what are you talking about?
Sure, versus
please. Okay, so what the students did was we held a breakfast for business. And we asked about 100 local businesses to come to a local breakfast spot, and we're going to discuss this. Well, about 30 showed up. Very nice. Including the general managers of some of the burger places or donut places, whatever. So the kids explained to them, listen, what you're doing is wrong. You're sticking us. You're essentially, in a lot of cases, ruining our future. A lot of us would like to go to Harvard and MIT, but we haven't got the money for that. Okay. So the answer from the business people was essentially, it's legal. We have to have a profit, okay, well, that line. Okay, that's fine. So it's the law. And interesting, two of the burger people got up and walked out because they said that the kids had snookered them into coming to this meeting. They were unethical in doing it. But here's what I didn't like. At the end of it all, and why this academy became a reality is issues like this, was, you know, I thought they would come up with, hopefully, this is wrong, ethics commission, and so forth and so on. They said what we learned is that, okay, there's an ethics commission and ethics laws, but all that does is prevent it from getting out of hand. But you still have to play the game if you're in the middle, the so-called gray area. You have to be just like they are. Now, at the meeting, 5 businesses, of which I was happy initially that they did it, got up and said, listen, from what your students are telling us, we're doing some things wrong and we're going to change how we do our business. Okay, so out of the 30, we get 5. But the kids said, well, in our discussion later, the only reason why they did it is because it was good for business. It wasn't the right thing to do. It was for the profit. So, Mr. Conley, what you're telling us about ethics and stuff is really a lot of baloney. And what you're really going to do is learn to play the game the way they play it, as long as you don't get too far outside the rules. You'll be okay.
So this is a great example of why government ethics is so different than business ethics, right? I mean, now this is not to paint a broad brush that all businesses are unethical and that all, right. But the tradition, I mean, this is a capitalistic society. It's a, you know, business's primary motive is to increase a profit. The managers of a company, if they have a fiduciary duty, it's to the shareholders, right? You know, so this is the narrow view of corporate responsibility here, that the primary fiduciary duty of business is to the shareholders to increase the profit, as long as you're playing by the rules. And so this would be the most ethical, in fact, way to go, if you're looking at it that way. I'm acting the most ethically because I'm looking at I'm weighing the costs and benefits, I'm increasing the share price, and the market and the laws of supply and demand will, if people don't like it, they'll stop getting my burgers, but as long as they're buying them, I'll keep going. You know, government doesn't operate that way. So I was going to say laugh, but the truth is I don't laugh. I roll my eyes. Whenever I hear it's election season, and whether we're talking about the next governor of the state of Rhode Island or the next president, and I hear the argument being made that what we need is a businessman to run this state or this country or this town like a business. Then we'll get rid of that deficit, then we'll bring costs under control, and I think, well, yeah, maybe you get costs under control, but you can't run government like a business. Government is not a business. Business is trying to increase profit, if it's a pure business, assuming it's not some kind of social entrepreneurship type thing or a nonprofit. Whereas, you know, government's goal is not to adjust its shareholders. You know, the goal of government is to help, sure, its taxpayers, but also its employees and also its residents. and also its businesses, and also to its children. And also, I mean, there are so many different, it's much more of a stakeholder model. It's much more of this broad view of social responsibility than in the business world. So, and that comes back to why we can expect our public officials not to lie, not to cheat, not to steal, not to give themselves jobs, not to do all of these things. Because it doesn't matter what the result is, what the consequence is. We're never going to pick a perfect consequence that's good for every one of these stakeholders and groups. We simply have to figure out what their duty is. And their duty is to uphold these highest standards of ethical conduct and respecting the public trust.
And on that note, Mr. Grammit, you might be interested to learn, and some of the people sitting here taking my public policy class, they have an assignment that's called ethical lobbying. So that what they're asked to do is find the principles of ethical lobbying, and there are a couple of places that they've gone to do that. I've directed them several places, but I think you've given them the theme this evening about holding yourself to the highest standard in public office. Because the assignment says, find the common principles of ethics from the American League of Lobbyists, from the Woodstock Principles and other places, and then use that as the focus for what would be a hypothetical speech to a legislator. Now, you've given them the thing. Shouldn't the legislature also be holding itself to the highest standards?
Absolutely.
Now, Mr. Grammit, I personally don't like the term lobbying. I think it's a horrific term, but have you encountered any ethical lobbying issues in the work that you do with the commission, or has the commission encountered any of those kind of issues?
Well, first I should say that there are ethical lobbyists because I'm a lobbyist for the Ethics Commission, and I'm a registered lobbyist for the, and you know, I'll be down at the State House next week testifying in front of the House Judiciary Committee. So I don't get paid any extra to lobby, but that's part of what I do with the Ethics Commission. You know, lobbying issues come up all the time. Lobbyists are, by definition, a person that is trying to change, if we're talking about a legislative lobbyist, a law, right? Either usually for their employer or constituent. So a business hires a lobbyist to go and change a law or keep a law in place, not have it change. So there's a financial interest in this decision that the legislature is trying to make. That makes the lobbyist an interested person. This is a term of art under the Code of Ethics. And we have specific ethics rules. Low bar ethics rules, right? The highest bar is, of course, you wouldn't accept lunch from a lobbyist who's trying to get you to pass a bill or not pass a certain bill. Of course you would. That's the high bar, the highest standards of ethical conduct. The low bar, the Code of Ethics says, okay, you can accept a gift from a lobbyist as long as it's worth $25 or less. So he can't take you to Capriccio, but he can take you to Fast Eddie's down on Doran Street, or, you know, Applebee's maybe. You know, so it's a $25 limit. That's the low bar. So if you accept a $25 lunch from a lobbyist and you're a legislator, have you acted ethically? Maybe, if you believe that acting ethically means trying to find that black line that I said doesn't exist, then you're ethical. You know, a business would certainly say I've acted ethically, right? I've complied with the law. The law says $25. I did not accept anything worth more than $25. But have you acted within the highest standards of ethical conduct? So we do see a lot of issues with lobbyists. The truth is, here's the funny thing. You want to talk about ethical lobbying? Who do you think was the biggest fan? Even though they didn't say so at the time, we used to have higher limits. At one time, it was $150. A lobbyist could give a legislator a gift of up to $150. Capriccio was on the table, okay? And then we dropped it down to $25. So after we did that at the Ethics Commission, who do you think we heard from? They just, thank you.
Lobbyists?
The lobbyists. They loved it. They loved it. Save money for themselves, for their clients. They don't have to go out to boring wine and dine meals at Capriccio and Capitol Grill and all over the place. You'd think that they would hate it, but it turned out that they were rather in favor of it. Now, that's not all of them.
So the question with regards to technology, and how have you seen technology sort of interface with this whole Board of Ethics, and how has it changed the work that the Ethics Commission is doing, say, over the last decade or so? I mean, we've seen a lot of changes with technology.
Well, you know, with the internet now, we can start our investigations, you know, immediately. A complaint comes in, and the Ethics Commission has subpoena power. We can subpoena documents and we can subpoena in people to testify. But really, within seconds of getting the complaint, you know, maybe the complaint is that a town council member awarded a contract to himself at a meeting. I can get right online, pull up the minutes of the town council meeting, confirm that that town council member was present at the meeting. It's probably videotaped. I can get that right at my workstation. I can download a copy of that. So the sheer volume of evidence that we can get without any kind of subpoena, without ever even getting up from our desks, is, you know, frightening. You know, and that's another broad concept for another day on a whole different issue. Just the idea of what's out there on the internet. You know, the things about you and you and you that I can find. You know, just with a couple of quick clicks of the internet. The other thing we've done is we've got some great efficiencies. We make elected officials file financial disclosure statements with us every year, and that's always been a paper form, and now we allow them to. We've created an online filing system, so now everything is electronic for the filing of financial disclosure, or it can be if you choose for it to be, and that's, you know, made so many efficiencies. The last thing that we've done, which anybody could do, but as far as I know, we're the only agencies that is doing this. This is important for those of you who are in the public sector, especially in Rhode Island. You know, Rhode Island has what's called APRA, Access to Public Records Act, and the federal government, it's Freedom of Information Act. But it's a requirement that public documents be given to the public when they ask for them within, it's 10 days in Rhode Island, and subject to an extension, and you know, you can require them to fill out a form to ask for it, and then it has to go through this big long process, and that's what the law requires. About 6 years ago at the Ethics Commission, we got a new printer, and we discovered that even though we hadn't asked for it, it was also a scanner. And I didn't know why at the time, but we were already making copies of our financial disclosure forms, so I said, well, scan them too. Let's just make electronic copies. What for? I don't know, just do it. Let's see what happens. And for a year or two, we didn't do anything with them. And then suddenly it occurred to me that we had a couple years worth of documents that were now electronic. And we're getting our APRA requests, and someone wants to see Senator Jones's financial disclosure form, and the light bulb goes off. Why am I making this person fill out a form and wait 10 days and pay 15 cents a page for copies and you know, go through all these hoops when the request just came in? I've got this on my hard drive. I can just email them back within 10 seconds with an attachment for what they want. And that's what we do now at the Ethics Commission. You don't have to fill out a form. Why should you have to fill out a form to get a public doc? It's already yours. You don't have to tell us your name. Why should we keep track of, you know, so you can be, you know, so something bad could happen to you because you're digging into something? We don't ask any of that. You want something that's public, you get it. You get it within 24 hours. So the Ethics Commission now responds to APRA requests in something like 97% of the time within the same day that it's asked for. And I don't think any other agency is living up to that standard, but that should be the gold standard, really.
How many employees do you have at the Ethics Commission?
We have 12 employees at the Ethics Commission. So there are 4 attorneys, 3 investigators, and support staff.
Investigators go out on the road to...
They do. They're all former either police officers or police detectives. They have investigative skills. You know, we send them out with subpoena authority to go out and investigate the ethics complaints that are filed at the Ethics Commission. And they have a lot of other duties too. We all wear about 15 different hats at the Commission because we're such a small agency.
And the 39 cities and towns are receptive to ethics investigators coming into their...
No. I mean, some are and some aren't. I mean, listen, you know, you just have to do what you have to do. Someone shows up with a subpoena, you have to You have to give.
Is that what causes you to go there, a subpoena or a?
What causes us to go out in the field is someone files a complaint, right? So, I mean, we don't know what's going on out there. We don't know who's done something wrong unless someone tells us. So either there's a newspaper article, perhaps, that gives us enough facts to get the ball rolling, or more likely than not, it's a citizen who is complaining about so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that. Now, what's the first defense that gets raised? That guy's just mad because he didn't get the contract, or that guy, I'm a Democrat and that was a Republican, or this and that and the other. Well, of course, they hate you, right? The people who like you don't file ethics complaints against you. I mean, it should, of course, this is your opponent. Those are the people who file complaints. It's someone who doesn't like you. But that doesn't mean it's not a good complaint. So I'll take a couple more questions.
At what point do you, what I should be asking, what's the process? If someone files an ethics complaint and you say, okay, I'm going to move forward for prosecution, or, because you say you do have authority.
Yeah.
So at what point do you say, okay, we have enough evidence to go after a public official?
We've got very specific procedures that are in writing, and they're all available on our website, so they're not a secret, and I'm happy to talk about them. So if you came into the office and said, I think so-and-so has done something wrong, first thing we do is have you sit down with one of our investigators just to kind of get an idea as to whether you're in the right place. If you file you have an absolute right to file a complaint. If you file a complaint, the first thing we do is review it to see if it even falls within our jurisdiction. You know, a fair amount of time we get a complaint, and the complaint is, I was discriminated against because I'm Asian, maybe, or or someone was rude to me. You know, there is an agency that handles that kind of thing. It's just not us. So we would, at that point, we wouldn't accept a complaint, but we would refer the person to the Human Rights Commission or the Attorney General's office if it's a criminal matter, or to the right person. But assuming what you've complained of is within our jurisdiction, we accept the complaint, and then the complainant doesn't do anything at that point. You're out of it. You don't have to get your own attorney. We handle it all from there. Just like if you went to the police department and claimed that someone committed a crime. You don't have to prove they committed a crime. You just provide the evidence. They'll take it from there. And it's the same thing here. You come to us, you file the complaint, give us all the evidence you have. If it's something that we can sink our teeth into, we've got it. And we take it from there. We bring it before we have a board. Our ethics commissioners are 9 volunteers who decide whether or not we go forward on these complaints. And if they authorize us, then out go the subpoenas, out goes the investigation. And ultimately, it ends up in kind of a trial before the Ethics Commission. If the commission finds that there was a violation of the code, they can impose a penalty. In a really egregious case, they could remove someone from office. And then there's an appeal process from there to the Superior Court for someone who doesn't like what happened.
I just want to jump back to something you were talking about earlier about the notion of a $25 gift and whether accepting something like that was ethical or not. By way of sharing a story, and I apologize if it's a little short on specifics, but read once about a charity that it was a Buddhist monastery, I believe, and they were collecting donations at an airport. And they had tried initially to solicit donations just by greeting people, disembarking planes, greeting them very pleasantly and then asking for a donation, and it wasn't very successful. At some point, they had the idea to present passengers with a small flower, a dandelion or something, an arguably worthless gift. But donations skyrocketed after you then asked, after you provided something, because it just engaged the human tendency to reciprocate, no matter the size of the gift. I mean, I think that's probably why you've probably been offered coffee, like a small cup of coffee every time you walk into a car dealership.
Walk through the Providence Place Mall, and every one of the kiosk people will try to hand you a free sample on your way past.
Yeah, so forget $25. Being offered anything kind of engages that natural tendency to reciprocate. So that's, I think that kind of speaks to the...
Well, that's right. That's the purpose of the rule. People often say, I'm not going to sell my vote for a tuna fish sandwich. I'm not going to issue this permit for a case of beer or a bottle of wine or a fruit basket. And my response is almost always the same. Of course you're not. I believe you, and I do. It's, you know, no, someone is not going to sell their soul down the road for a, you know, lunch at Applebee's or a, you know, something like that. But that's not the point. If it was a bribe, that's a whole different thing. You go to prison for that. You know, if it were an actual bribe, it wouldn't be before the Ethics Commission. You know, the FBI would be involved, okay? So it's not that you have, the reason we have this gift rule is not because we think you're actually going to sell your vote or your decision making. It's because it's that perception that someone is buying your influence. That from the outside looking in, it shouldn't, they see that and it shouldn't be necessary. If you accept that, then it creates the impression to everyone else that that's what's required, that I should have to do that too. And this is the kind of thing you see in the, is it North Providence that the 3 councilmen who went to prison for shaking down, right? This idea that, you know, they're not going to change the zoning ordinance to allow Stop and Shop to come in unless they get some payout. That's bad, okay, that's horrible. That actually was bribery. But the real damage is every other business in town now thinking that that's the only way that they can also get the same kind of thing, and creating that appearance issue and that this horrible reputation. So,
and I think that's the great thing for my ethics speech assignment, avoiding the appearance. Mr. Grammit, you've done a wonderful job. You fit exactly where I wanted you to in this year's program.
Great.
Thank Mr. Grammit with me, if you would. On behalf of the NPA Leadership Programs and RIASP, we have a small token of appreciation. It's made in Rhode Island with Rhode Island laborers and Rhode Island insurance.
Fantastic. And now, can I accept?
Can you?
Can I accept? The answer is
yes.
Yes, I can, because I'm not before any interested person, right? So Dr. Hall and all of the affiliated groups don't have any financial interest in the decisions I'm authorized to make here at the Ethics. Nevertheless, this will be a gift that will go to the Ethics Commission and stay at the Ethics Commission. Why? Because we hold ourselves to the highest standards of ethical conduct.
And we're pleased that it's going to be with them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.